Now we're going to transition to who I'm calling the closer and many other different things, but I'm going to try not to cry. So, but Adrianne Haslet is a professional ballroom dancer. She also survived the Boston Marathon bombing 13 years ago, where she lost her left leg below her knee during the attack. She's been featured in documentaries and covers of magazines, but I would like to get a little bit personal in what she means to me briefly. There are a lot of things written about her being an advocate, an athlete, an educator, an activist, an inspiration. But to me, she represents what I felt when I watched Alyssa Liu, if anybody knows who Alyssa Liu is. Yeah. If you watch her in the 2026 Olympics, if you haven't, go online and watch her skate. And I'm not an athlete, and I don't really get transformed by watching athletes in general. Well, some like Tom Brady, but but when I watched her skate, I felt that the way she skated should be what you feel like when you love what you do. It's not work. It's not a competition, even though it was a competition. It didn't look like that to me. It looked like pure joy. And when I heard Adrianne talk, I heard her a few years ago when I was in the Coast Guard, and she spoke at a big event. I felt the same way, and I would like to give you a new moniker, if I could. To me, you are a voice dancer. And and I know that that's a term, I'm not even sure I've heard of it before, but to me, that's what you are. You are a voice dancer. So thank you for everything that you are and that you've done, and we are lucky to have you here today. They say you are who you are with, and we are honored to be with you today. So without further ado, Adrianne Haslet.
I'll take that. You can take my son. This is Fred Astaire. Hi. Hello. It's so wonderful to be here with you today, Bowen. Thank you for that incredible introduction. I'm right here, buddy. You're okay. It's wonderful to be here with you. I am so grateful to Miel and to Bowen for recommending me and to be here with you. My story starts just like anyone else's. It starts in the very beginning. I grew up with parents who owned an independent books and record store in the Seattle area. They founded it, brought it up, and started it and had multiple locations. And when you have parents that own and operate independent books and record stores, you don't have a television. That is not something you do. Computers and the internet didn't exist back then, but you certainly did not have a television. So the first time I ever saw a television was when I was at my aunt and uncle's house one night, and we had dinner, and all of us cousins were playing, and then we were put to bed. I was probably about 8 years old-ish, and we were put to bed, and many of the parents in this room. I see a lot of incredible women and a few good men out there. I'd like to see you. It's wonderful. You know, as parents, that the first thing your kid will do is immediately sneak back downstairs, right? So it's exactly what I did. I snuck back downstairs, and I saw all the parents there with their fancy grape juice and their fancy glasses, and they're gathered around this square thing with a picture on it. It was a TV, and it had a black and white film on it, and it was cheek to cheek with Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. Oh, I'm so excited. I see recognition in that. I don't always get that. It was old back then. It's even older now. And it's Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, for those of you that don't know, are very famous actors and actresses and ballroom dancers. Ballroom dancing is the thing you see in Dancing with the Stars. It's partner dancing in very small clothes. Not Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, of course, but it's evolved. And I saw everything that Ginger Rogers was doing better backwards and in high heels. It was incredible. And my little jaw hit the ground. I was hiding behind, one of those chairs that every relative has in their house, and their grandpa sits in it, and it is made of carpet and it smells really bad. You know which one I'm talking about? I'm smushed. And I have fire engine red hair and these giant glasses that I insisted were bright red to match my hair. I was such a nerd. And I was like, I'm going to be Ginger Rogers. So I somehow managed to sneak back upstairs before getting caught. But that next morning, with the true attention span of a child, I put my little fists on that breakfast table and I said, I'm going to be Ginger Rogers when I grow up. My parents were like, did you sneak downstairs last night? I was like, no, who said that? But I think, in all honesty, I think they were just glad that something like Game of Thrones wasn't on, because I have no idea how that would have turned out. I don't know who I would have gone on to become. And so they immediately put me into classes in gymnastics to work on my posture, and then into dance classes. And I think they were very excited to have something that would exhaust me by the end of the day, or at least attempt to exhaust me as a high-energy child. Still am a high-energy child in a lot of ways. And I danced all through middle school and high school, and then I started hearing about this thing called college. And I thought, I don't think Ginger Rogers needs calculus. I don't think she needs English lit. I don't know if she needs calculus. It just sounds like she would skip that and just go straight to pro. That just sounds like it would be the way. And meanwhile, I have two older brothers who are twins that went on to college and, full ride, and they're perfect. They always came home on time. I was not that child. I was the redhead. And so I talked to my parents about this. I said, I don't think Ginger Rogers needs calculus. And they said, you know what? We really think you need a good career, hon. We think you need a good, solid career to fall on. And, keeping the lights on costs money. And you're not always going to live at home, just in case that wasn't clear. And but they didn't have a great argument to stand on, because when you grow up in a house with people sitting at your dining table who are on tour, on book tours, and on tour for concerts, and for being on the road for releasing a new record. Like, we had Pearl Jam often, and we had Gloria Steinem, and all these incredible people at our dinner tables, which sounds very cool now. And back then, I just wanted to watch Saved by the Bell. I just thought these people were using my bathroom, and it was really annoying, and such a child. And they didn't have a leg to stand on, right? That's a bad term. They didn't have a leg to stand on. They weren't pushing the lawyer, doctor, scientist kind of thing that is pushed in a lot of households. And so they settled on, we will support you. You know what? It's been your dream. You have shown you're dedicated in all of your dancing, and we will support you. And that means emotionally. We will support you emotionally. And you graduate in a year. So get on that. So I worked extra hours at the bookstore. We'd been working there forever, but mostly it was child labor. I was finally getting paid. And worked at the bookstore, took on a dry cleaning job. It was painfully boring. And saved up enough that when I graduated high school at 17, I lied on my application for my first apartment that I was 18. You could do that back then and not get arrested, or at least I didn't. And I feel like I need to say that in a room full of lawyers. Please don't. And I got an apartment, and I got a job at Old Navy folding jeans, monotonous work. And then in the evenings, I would audition with ballroom dance studios and dance studios in general. So I would go after work, seeing triple of jeans in my head and trying not to go cross-eyed. And I would stand in a room, and don't worry, I'm not going to make you get up and do this, but it would be a room like this that did flat hardwood floors, and we would all be gathered around the outside, and then there was a fold-out table here with 5 or 6 crusty old white dudes. I don't say that the dudes in here are great. I'm not saying that about you. But these 4 or 5 crusty old white dudes with numbers from 1 to 10 telling you how good or bad your body moved. And I was like, well, that sounds healthy. I want to do this for the rest of my life. So I would audition and audition, audition. That brings me to the first lesson that I want to share with you, which is no just means not yet, right? So I would audition, and they would say, your hair's too red, so I bleached it like a Q-tip, or you're too big, not big enough, you're too tall, not tall enough, you're too this, too that, posture this, looks that. It was so wildly unhealthy, and I kept going back for more. I'm in therapy now. And I would audition, and finally I I was at this audition and I thought, this is it. It's been like a year and a half. How many times are you going to knock on this door before realizing it's not going to open? And so I'm waiting in line and I'm thinking I should just make a run for it, but trying to exit out, like crossing the dance floor would be way more embarrassing than just giving it my all, like a real 80s dance movie, right? And so I turned to the person behind me to distract me in conversation, and I said, "Oh, what is your dance experience? Like, what kind of things have you specialized in?" And she said, "I just got off tour with Janet Jackson." And I was like, "I just got off tour with Janet Jackson." I did not help my imposter syndrome whatsoever. So I just settled into myself and tried really hard to just ignore that and think that she was lying. I'm sure she was not. And I told myself she was, and I went out there and I gave it my all, like a real 80s, 90s, like rom-com dance movie. Save the Last Dance, I think was the name of it. And I was like picturing it, gave it my all, and then waited for them to not call my number, and they did. And they went down to 20, and then they went down to 3, and then they went down to 2, and it was 2 of us that made it. And I was so excited, and I went pro as a ballroom dancer, and I quit Old Navy so fast. I didn't even give them 2 weeks' notice. I was like, I will never need this job again. I'm not even using it as a reference. I like Old Navy. But I went on to get my own silk organza gowns and ostrich feather dresses and shoes, and I danced all over the world with top hats and tails, very handsome top hats and tails, which is just as exciting as it sounds, especially if they have a French accent or Italian accent or a Greek, whatever accent. And it was fantastic. It was so much fun, and I wanted to be Ginger Rogers. I wanted to be perfect. We've all, whether we want to admit it or not, chased some form of perfect, whatever that is, right? And so I kept going to my coach, because eventually if you do this long enough and you exceed at it, you get a coach and you get shoe sponsors and dress sponsors and so on, because we are actual athletes. And I went to my coach and I was like, I'm not making it to Worlds. I need to win Worlds. I need to be best in the world. Like, how am I doing this? And he said, I think you need to move to Boston. Boston has a very competitive ballroom scene. A lot of people don't know that because we're up and tall in buildings and don't have windows, but it is very competitive. It's a very niche world. And he said, I think you should move to Boston. I thought, Boston, okay. I'll pick up everything I ever known and move across the country and go. Why not? This is my big dream. And so I recorded my VHS tape and I sent it in a manila envelope, because that's what you did back then. And I mailed it off, and I heard back in a few weeks, and I got it. I got this into the studio and moved out to Boston and packed everything I had, said goodbye to everyone I've ever known, and said goodbye to mom and daughter lunch dates and daddy date nights and all the things that I'd been loving and doing. And I moved out to Boston. I got a new dance partner and new sponsors, and I got a new boss and all sorts of things. And I went out to the competitions, and I would get, further and further in competitions. And I finally made it to Worlds years later. Finally make it to Worlds, and I get to semifinals, come back, and then make it out there again, get to semifinals, and they're calling names, and I thought I might have it. My coach called my family to make sure that they were there. I cry a lot, so we'll get used to that. And I got 3rd in the world, and I was so happy, and I was like, oh, yes, and I gambled like $50 from those winnings, because I was in Vegas, and I went out in my ostrich feathers, like, because you can do that in Vegas, and my Oompa Loompa tan with the lashes and the nails and the hair. My signature was like this faux hawk that was just giant. You can get away with it in dancing, in ballroom dancing, especially in Vegas. And we celebrated, and I get back to the studio, and in Boston, I go to my boss, and I'm like, oh my gosh, guess what? 3rd in the world. I'm so excited. I'm not bragging, but I worked hard, right? When we work hard for something, we celebrate it, especially as women, we're told not to. And I sure was told not to. I looked at him, I said, that's the 3rd in the world. I did it. You've never had anyone even make it 2 Worlds from this studio, just as a reminder, buddy. He picked me up and back from Seattle, and he said, yeah, Adrianne, next time, if you don't make first, I don't think you should come home. Yeah, except I added other words, like, what the foxtrot is this person saying to me right now? Like, why is this? And I was so shocked, and I thought he must be kidding. And I just sort of stood there looking at him dumbfounded, kind of waiting for the punchline. And he's like, do you have anything else? I was like, well, I sure do, but I'm under contract and I've worked too hard for this. And so I did what a lot of us do when we are having a bad day at work, and that is to lock yourself in the bathroom and cry, right? And then I went back out and I had to touch up all my mascara and lashes and Oompa Loompa spray tan and all of that, and I finished out my day. And that night I cried myself to sleep, as one does, and woke up the next morning still crying. I dreamt the worst things. I had hit this thing that I'd always wanted to do. Yes, I didn't make first. I wanted to make first, but honestly, the two ahead of me, I was lucky to be in their company. They were incredible. And I wake up the next morning crying, and I ask, myself, like, what am I doing? I have all these existential questions. I've just been monotonously going through, that's a word, I swear, going through the motions of this dance career. I'd given up everything. We practiced 14 hours, 12 hours a day leading up to big competitions. And you know that you skip, going home for Thanksgiving, you skip all of the things. I'm sure that's very familiar in your world of working long hours, as they were talking about with burnout. And I decide to call my boss, and I call him and I said, I'm going to take a day off today. And he said, Adrianne, we don't take days off. Which is true. We tell the government we take days off, but we don't actually take days off. When we take days off, we come in and we practice for minimum 6 hours. It's totally illegal, by the way. Like, I hear the wheels turning. You could totally go for that, by the way. You should go after him. I highly encourage it. Please do. His name's Mark Leitner. He works at Boston Park Plaza. The lawyer I hired didn't do well, so he's still there. Boston Park Plaza, Arthur Murray. And I highly encourage it. And call me. He says we don't take days off. If you decide to take today off and you don't show up for work, you may not have a job tomorrow. And I said, okay, I'll talk to you tomorrow. And I hung up and I cried more, and I was shaking, and I went into the shower and showered and got ready for the day. And I thought, my gosh, I haven't ever explored Boston. I'd been there for 5-ish years by then. And every meal we eat in the studio, if we are not dancing ourselves, we need to be studying somebody else's technique or studying somebody else's coaching lesson. And so I sat in a restaurant. I've only been sitting in restaurants during the day for 13 years. And I sat in the restaurant and I had lunch. I had a glass of wine, which I'd later be very excited that I had. And I get out of lunch and I take a walk, and I hear like this parade, I think, is going on down the street. So I walk over there and I see all of these people running with like numbers on their chest. And they were at the finish line, and they're like puking and bleeding and passing out and crying of happiness and sad and all of the emotions, every emotion. And I tap a guy on the shoulder, and he turns around and he looks at me. And mind you, I have still the faux hawk because it takes days and a professional to get through it. And there's so much aqua, whatever on there, Aquanet hairspray. And I have the lashes, and I have my Oompa Loompa spray tan, and I'm in 4-inch heels on a day when every single human in Boston is in kicks. And he looks me up and down, and not in a checkout way, but like what is this? What on earth is going on with this one? And I said, what is this? And he goes, it's the Boston Marathon. I had been in Boston for like 4 or 5 years. And I said, oh, like a race, like a road race. And he said, yeah, like a road race. And I said, how far are they running? And he said, 26.2. And I said, miles? And he said, yes. And I said, for a statement necklace and a free banana? Like, that's it. They get a medal and a free, like, that's why they're running? And he said, yeah. And he said, how on earth are you visiting Boston? He's looking me up and down, just trying to figure out what is happening here. And he said, how on earth are you visiting Boston and you don't know what the Boston Marathon is? And I said, no, I just live like 3 blocks in the other direction. I am just usually in a ballroom. And he's like, okay. And he just goes back to watching the race. I would love to find him one day. And I decide, this is great. I certainly would never get caught sweating in public. Ginger would never sweat in public. But I can respect a sport, right? They are dedicating so much of their time and energy and everything to this sport. I want to be able to watch and cheer them on, but I decide maybe not at the finish line. It's wild things happening at the finish line. People are peeing and puking and all the stuff. So I decide to walk a little bit further away, and I'm about 2 or 3 blocks away, and I hear a loud blast behind me, and the ground shook violently underneath me. And I looked back, and I saw nothing but black smoke. And I froze. I smelled the smoke, and there were police with their guns drawn, racing out into the place where the runners were. And runners were turning around and running in the other direction, and people were coming with, they have the catchers at the finish line with their wheelchairs for people that are, their bodies just give out at the end. And the catchers are coming over toward the smoke, and I knew that we were in trouble. I knew it was an attack. I knew it was too big of a blast to be a blown speaker from like a press music or something. And I immediately lowered my head and plugged both of my fingers in my ears, and then I was on the ground. I found out later, while helping the FBI and the lawyers, hell yeah, with the case of the monster whose name I conveniently will never learn, that I was walking 2 blocks with that terrorist, shoulder to shoulder. I saw it on the surveillance, and I was walking with him, and he dropped the backpack right near my feet, between me and Martin Richard, the little 8-year-old boy, and Ling as well, who also passed that day. May they rest in peace. And dropped that backpack and walked away and detonated it. And I was on the ground, and I saw nothing but gray. And I thought, am I okay? Am I alive? I didn't have any of my senses: sight, hearing, smell, feeling, nothing. I felt like I couldn't move. Later learned that's just from the blast hitting you. Common in roadside bombs. And then the gray started to clear, and I smelled that all too familiar smell of when you leave your hair under the curling iron or the hairdryer for too long. It smelled like burnt hair, and I instinctively raised my arm and patted out my eyebrow and my right side of my head that was on fire. I lost 4 inches of hair and an entire eyebrow. Thank God that grew back. And I then started to see clearly. I realized the gray was not me in a different world or whatever happens to us in the afterlife, that I was very much alive, and the gray was just smoke. And I look down, and I'm taking evaluation of what is happening around me. I see things and other people and other things on the sidewalk that I'll never repeat unless it's to lawyers and FBI. And I lift my right leg, and I see a giant gash in my upper right thigh, and it's bleeding badly. And I think this is not good. I later learned that that's where they found the label to the pressure cooker, was inside my right thigh. And I was lifting my left leg, and I couldn't lift it, and I couldn't figure out why until I realized that I was lifting it, except it was just gone. And I thought 2 things. Number 1, there goes Ginger. And number 2, damn it, how selfish of me for going after this vain, oh so vain dream of being perfect and being Ginger Rogers, There's no way my family can get here in the time it's going to take for me to be able to say goodbye. I thought, there's no possible way that someone could survive this. No way could I survive this. And somehow something inside of me, that survival instinct that we're all born with and animals are born with, that I rolled over onto my belly and I started to crawl with your forearms along the cement, and a man grabbed me from under my arms and dragged me into the restaurant. It was similar to this, where the door, it was blown out, but the door and windows were there, and the sun was pouring in so beautiful. It was such a beautiful day. And I was propped up against the stairs at what was then the Forum restaurant. And he said, my name is, and we'll call him Dr. B because I respect his privacy, but I've luckily been able to stay in touch with him and he and his daughters. And he said, my name is Dr. B, and I'm about to save your life. I'm going to try my very best. And he rips off his belt in one felt swoop and ties it around my left leg for a tourniquet and squeezes it really tight. And I yelp out in pain. And then there's another man that's standing there saying, what can I do to help? And Dr. B reaches over to this man's crotch and undoes his belt in like one fell swoop, much to his wild surprise. Undoes his belt in one fell swoop. I don't know where he learned to do that. I didn't ask. I want to ask, but I'm not going to ask. And undoes it and then whips it around, and he has that man hold on to that tourniquet. And they're talking to me, and they're not letting me see what is happening, because apparently if you see the visual of how bad it is, your body starts to react differently, and it can really cause problems. So they're talking to me, and I'm getting colder and colder, and they're trying to tell me to keep my eyes open, and I just am freezing cold. And I love to be cold. I fit in really well at Boston. I am just so cold, and they keep telling me to open my eyes, and I'm losing communication with them, and then I finally open my eyes again, and in that doorway where the sun is pouring in walks 5 of the hottest Boston firemen I've seen in my entire life. And I was like, hey. And my therapist since has said that sometimes when something's going really, really wrong in your life and then it goes really right, that sometimes your body can like remember it better than it actually is. But I've spoken to the Boston Fire Department, and they're like Grey's Anatomy hot. None of them were single, unfortunately. But they put me on a gurney and wheeled me out into the cement, and I was put in an ambulance with someone else who I did not think would survive, but thankfully did. And to brag on Boston even more than I always do, every single person of all the 260 plus people that were physically injured that day, a lot of hearing because of the blasts, all 260 made it to the hospital in under 9 minutes. It was incredible work from people running toward the problem, running toward calling ambulances, putting on tourniquets. Every single person that made it to a hospital survived. It was incredible work. And I make it to the hospital, and you can imagine, I went to Boston Medical Center, and you can imagine the triage that was happening in the ERs. You know, they had no idea that was coming. They were incredible. They were so incredible. But they were coming over and saying, you know, Adrianne, you're next in, we're wheeling you out to surgery. You have one phone call, and you've lost too much blood. You've lost too much blood. We have people giving blood, but there were runners that ran to the local hospitals just to give blood after running the marathon. And they said, you need to call home and say goodbye. You need to call home and say goodbye to your family before we wheel you into surgery. We don't know if you're going to make it. Multiple doctors told me that, came up and told me that. And I speak for a living. I've been doing this in faraway places, from Kenya to Nepal to Copenhagen to Boston to Atlanta last week, Jersey yesterday, and all over. And I still have yet to find the words. There's no arrangement of the 26 letters we all have to choose from that can describe what it's like to hear that you are not going to make it and you need to say goodbye. But that brings me to my next life lesson, which is to take 3. Take 3 seconds, take 3 minutes, take 3 days if you need it in order to make a big, big decision, right? I know everyone in this room makes very big decisions regularly. And I knew that my parents are still together, but I didn't know if they would be physically together in that moment, right? Who would I call? Would I leave a message that would be played for my older brothers and my parents for the rest of time? What would I say? I knew I needed to be calm enough to not cause them to have a heart attack or crash a car. And so I pulled the blankets up over my head to drown out the screams of other people that were near me, and I called my dad because A, I'm a daddy's girl, and B, my mom doesn't know how to work the volume on her ringer. She just never will learn. I love her. Love you, Mom. And I called, and my dad answered, and he said, hey, how's it going? And I said, hey, where are you? And he said, we're on the freeway. Mom's driving. And I said, okay, you need to pull over. And I must have sounded a little too calm, because he then said, young lady, you took your drive test in the state of Washington. You know you cannot pull over on the freeway. Forever a rule follower. He went to the Naval Academy, so, you know, he's a teddy bear, but he went to the Naval Academy. And I said, Dad, there's been a terrorist attack, and my voice cracked, and I told him what happened. And in my family, we don't do pranks, we don't do jokes, we laugh all the time, but we aren't that family. He knew it was serious, and he asked my mom to pull over, and they pulled over. One of 2 laws he will break that day. And they pulled over, and I said the hardest, most painful, most awful goodbye that I could have ever said. And I handed the phone to the nurse, and I needed to lie. I needed to lie for my own self, and I needed to hear it. I said, my parents are around the corner. Will you please give them directions? And she said, I sure will. She knew they were in Seattle. And then I was wheeled into surgery, and I saw that bright light just like on Grey's Anatomy and ER, and then there was a hand that went over the bright light and a face that was in a surgical mask and cap and the surgical goggles. And even with all of that, I saw these really warm, genuine brown eyes. And he said, my name is Jeffrey Kalish. I'm the head of cardiovascular surgery, and you've been assigned to me. And I'm going to try my very best to save your life. I promise you. I was just over at the blast, and I was over at the finish line, and I was at the first blast, and I made sure my family was safe, and then I took a pedicab to the hospital and scrubbed in, and here I am. And I said, verbatim, this was going to be my last words. And I could joke about it now, but I said, my foot is over on Boylston Street. I have not made first in the world. And my parents are on their way, so you better have had sleep last night. And he said, count back from 10. My last words were saying that I'm not good enough. What? That is how ingrained this was. And it did not come from my parents. It did not come from anywhere else except for this career that I had just zeroed in on, And I would like to blame my parents too. Trust me, I try. They just didn't pressure me like that. They pressured me in other ways. So that's okay. And I woke up. Clearly, I woke up from surgery, and I look down, and I'm doing a take, on the bed, and I see one leg is longer than the other. And while I knew it was gone on that sidewalk, it is a very different sight when you are awake and clean and after surgery. And then at the end of the bed, I look up, and it is Dr. Kalish with both of my parents on either side of him. My dad had asked if he could pace the airplane. I don't think I'm supposed to say this, but I'm going to. If he could pace on takeoff and across the country and landing, because he could not possibly sit down, and somehow the pilot let him. I can't imagine what that flight was like for them, but they stood at the end of that bed and they smiled at me like this. Like, we're so happy to see you, and oh my God, do you see what happened? How is she going to react? What is a parent supposed to do? My parents and I are very, very tight. And the next few weeks were, as you would imagine, horrific and awful and hard. And then one day, they had a family room at the end of the hall for families to hang out in and get food because they didn't want to go home. A lot of people had flown in, and they'd watch the news. I had no interest in seeing what had happened. I thought the bombs dropped from the sky for 4 months because I just wouldn't let anyone talk to me about it to protect my mental health. And they would watch the news. They would get sandwiches when we were getting more surgeries and sleeping and so on. And she comes in from down the hall, and she walks into my hospital room, and she's like doing one of these. My mom is very mischievous. She goes, hey, are you doing anything right now? And I was like, I have tubes coming out and IVs and things coming out of every place I had no idea you could have tubes come out of. I'm hooked up to everything in a hospital bed. And I was like, not up to much, Mom. What are you doing? And she said, well, I just saw in the news that Anderson Cooper is down in Copley Square. And I was like, cool. And she goes, I kind of want to go meet him. Do you mind if I go? You don't need me, right? And I was, do I need my, sure, Mom. Tell him I said I would join you, but I can't because I had a hard couple of weeks, in case you didn't know. And I think it had only been a week. And she said, oh, good, as long as you don't need me, I'm going to go. So can you send Dad in or someone? So I could, hold someone's hand. But you should go live your best life. Tell him I said hi. And so she leaves, and I don't know how many hours later she comes back, and she peers around the hospital door, and she's beet red, fire engine red. She goes, guess what I did? And I was like, I have no idea. And I had already forgotten about the Anderson Cooper thing because meds and trauma, so much trauma. And she goes, guess what I did? And I was like, what? And she goes into the room, and behind her is Anderson Cooper and 5 cameras. So oh my gosh, and I start licking my hand like a cat. I pushed my call button for a nurse to bring me an eyebrow pencil to draw on something, please. I hadn't seen seen a mirror, but I knew it was bad. By the way, people were like, oh, how are you doing? Like, when people look at you jarring, it's a very new experience when you're used to dancing in a sequin bikini and people don't look at you jarring. And he walks in and he has blue eyes, and I was like, hey, how's it going? And he sits down in the bed and he's like, can I talk to you? And I was like, yes. Yes, you can, Anderson Cooper. And my mom's like, and we talk, and he says, do you think you'll ever dance again? And I said, I really want to try. I really want to try my best, and I'm gonna try my best. And he said, well, if you learn, will you teach me? And I said, absolutely. Heck yeah, I'll teach you. And that felt so good to say the goal out loud, right? Felt so good to say the goal out loud that somewhere inside of me, I then said, and I think one day I'll run the Boston Marathon. And he said, Adrianne, we just got done talking about how crazy runners are and how you would never do that. And I said, well, from somewhere deep inside me, I said, well, there was once a time where I wasn't a ballroom dancer, and I did that. And I think I could at least try. I just want to give a big thank you for so many people surrounding all of us. I know you saw it here and across the world and across the country, of people just pouring their hearts into all of our survivor communities. It was, speaking of how the country is now, that was, at least from my inside perspective, it was such a time when so many people united. It was beautiful, considering the tragedy. And he said, well, if you run it, do it. We'll be cheering you on. And I thought, yeah. And later that night, I'm in the hospital room and hanging out. And considering the circumstances, I'm feeling pretty okay. I have these goals that I feel good about. And in walks another surgeon, not mine, not my Superman, Dr. Kalish. And he said, it's really important that I let you know something. It's really important that we keep your dreams realistic when you're in the hospital or out of the hospital. And I just need you to know that I've never met an amputee dancer or runner. And of course, they exist, by the way, long before I came along. And he said, I just want you to know I've never met either. And you really shouldn't have hope. Your chances are 1 in a million. And I was like, what the foxtrot are you talking about? And I put my finger in the air, and it was not this one. And I said, if my chances are 1 in a million, I will be that one. Get out of my room. And because I was angry that I was blown up by a terrorist, and I had a target, and I was gonna, and I let him know it. But deep down, I believed him. Right? He was the expert. He was the professional. And I let Dr. Kalish, my Superman surgeon, know what happened. And a couple weeks later, Dr. Kalish walks in, and he has my discharge papers in his hand, and he asks my family to leave. And you can imagine how close all of us got to our doctors and nurses and the teams. And he said, Adrianne, I need you to make me 3 promises before we each sign these and you start to get on with your goals. And I said, okay, what are the 3 promises? And he said, promise number 1, don't let anyone else take out your stitches. And I was like, oh, easy peasy. I have stranger danger? No, yes. Easy, I promise. I've gone to this man for a blister. He's head of cardiovascular surgery, as a reminder. I have a blister. 38 years old at the time. And I said, I promise. And he said, okay, Adrianne, promise number 2. When you dance again, not if, you tell me, and I will be there. Whether that is in your kitchen or on a stage, I will be there cheering you on. And I said, I promise. And we were both just sobbing. And he said, okay, promise number 3, Adrianne. When you're on the Boston Marathon, you tell me, and I will be there cheering you on every step of the way, all the way across that finish line. And I said, I promise, even though I didn't believe a word of it. But this is another life lesson I want to share with you, which is believe in the conviction of others, even when you may not believe it yourself. Why? Because the other people that are surrounding us in this room, in your families, in your firms, they can't hear that voice in your head that's doubting you, right? You say your goal out loud so that someone comes to you and says, oh, I heard you have that goal to run Boston or dance again, and how's that going? And you say, well, I have all this self-doubt, but they believe in you. They see what you can't see, what we can't see, because in our head, man, I don't like to generalize and make assumptions about a group of people. We all know that doesn't get us very far in this country. We've talked a lot about that today. But I am going to make a generalization about everyone in the room right now, and I include myself, and I feel comfortable doing this, is that none of us need help doubting ourselves, right? We have got that down. We are so good at it. But we need help believing in ourselves. And so I believed in his conviction that I was going to do this, and I signed those discharge papers, and I was on my way. A few months later, I fulfilled promise number 1. I got my stitches out. We took pictures, we took videos. I was so excited. And I got fit for my prosthetic after those stitches healed. And I started walking in my prosthetic, and I ran into an old dance partner of mine who said, remember what Fred Astaire used to say? I was like, no, tell me. He said, if you can walk, you can dance. And I was like, that's just something we tell students so they feel like they can dance in my lessons. He's like, no, Adrianne, you know that's not true. And so I was avoiding it. I was avoiding the feeling of comparing what it used to feel like to ballroom dancers are nerds, and we would measure. Like I could, at the time, I had so many muscles in my feet. They were 2 sizes bigger than they are right now. And you would be able to fly in like 4 steps from one corner of the room to the other by pushing off your toes. And I knew that was not going to be the way I felt now with this weighted prosthetic plastic metal thing that I had at the end of my leg. But I did. I went in and I put one foot in front of the other and took some side steps and some backward steps. And in January, after April of losing my leg, I was standing backstage at the TED conference with an Oompa Loompa tan and nails and lashes and my signature faux hawk and a tall, handsome top hats and tails dance partner next to me. And I was getting ready to go out, and I immediately started to cry. We have 5 minutes till curtain. And I start to cry, and my dance partner says, Adrianne, it's okay, it's okay. You know, you'll be perfect, you'll be perfect. You'll remember your steps, you don't have to worry. And I looked at him and I said, I'm not crying because I'm worried I'll mess up. I'm not crying because I want to be perfect. I'm crying because I'm really just grateful to be here. And that was such a turn. And I wish that for everyone who is striving for perfection to just be grateful to be there. And I went out and that curtain opened and I didn't mess up, which was nice. But I danced and I fulfilled promise number 2 because Dr. Kalish was watching. And we hugged and we cried. And he quickly reminded me of promise number 3. And I looked at him and I said, do you know that's 26.2 miles? They pick you up in the Boston Common and then drive you 26.2 miles away, and you have to run home, and you get like a few pretzels and a water in a Dixie cup. That is hard. And he said, Adrianne, you've got this, you've got this. And I thought, oh boy, I'll give it a good college try, because I didn't even apply for college. And so I get my running leg out of the back of my closet. I only had it because it helped me do the jive, because it bounces. And I buy a sneaker. I think it's the first time I ever owned a sneaker. And I get outside and I run around the block, and it was the hardest thing I've ever done. And I kept at it and I kept at it. And about 6 or 7 months later, I am at brunch with a couple of dance friends, and I confess, I've been running. I've been running. I was sweating outside. Like I'm at AA. I'm not trying to make fun of AA, but I'm just saying it felt like this giant confession. And they said, oh, wow, like I was some sort of crazy. And they said, this is big news. How far are you running? And I said, I have no idea. Do you have a car follow you? Like, how does that? I don't do directions. And they said, no, Adrianne, honey, sweetheart, you have an app. And so they put the app into my phone. And the next day I go out and I run like a typical run, a little shorter than I usually do. And I get back and I look at the app, and it was 10 miles. And I thought, oh, naively, I said, well, I could double that and add 6. So I went on the news and I said, I'm going to run the 2016 Boston Marathon as a thank you to everyone's love and support over the years. And I was so excited, and I lined up at the start line, having run nothing. I was wearing all cotton, which tells you everything to know about my training. And I'm at the start line and I have complete panic. And I stand at the start line, and my friend looks at me and he tells me the most important lesson I want to share with you, which is what will get you to the finish line is nothing compared to what got you to the start, right? So often we think of the monumental task ahead of us, bringing this case to court, making this brief, running 26.2 miles, forgetting all of the things that have already brought us to that start line, right? I had learned to walk on cobblestones. Why do you have so many cobblestones? And tile floors and through Boston winters and the crunchy snow and the ice that I couldn't even feel my foot underneath me. And I'd learned to do all that. Was 26.2 going to be hard? Hell yeah. It was going to be hard, but I could do it. I would get there eventually, maybe tomorrow, but I would get there. And I took off and I ran 6 minutes and I cried, sat on the curb and cried. I hugged every single police officer that was protecting us from the possible terrorists that would try and get us again. I stopped in medical tents and thanked every single person. And I stopped for a beer. I stopped for a burger, which caused me to need a nap. I kissed some girls in Wellesley because why not? Everybody does it. And then I took some shots with the guys at BC, BC. Doesn't matter. I don't remember. And then I took another nap. And then I crossed the Boston Marathon finish line dead last in 10 hours and 44 minutes. I thought, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And then my friends were looking at their phones and they're screaming at me. And I thought, what now? And they said, Adrianne, President Barack Obama just tweeted you and said, congratulations, Adrianne. I was watching. And terror and bombs don't stop us. We carry on and we finish the race. And I was like, game. And I took one sip of champagne and I was out for 10 hours. But I fell in love with running. And I went on to advocate and fight for a division in the para division in the Boston Marathon for blade runners like me. Even the Paralympics don't think that we can go further than 200 meters still. I've knocked on the Paralympics doors countless times. As you can tell, I'm a little feisty, got that redhead in me. And I've knocked on their doors countless times. I've spoken with them in the audience and I will call them out and I will continue to. But I fought for a para division in the Boston Marathon where blade runners and people with limb difference and limb loss like me can compete with their names on their bibs and stand at that start line. And I found myself there after advocating for 8 years, standing at the start line with other para-elite runners with our own division. And I look down and I see 35 different blades and feet on that start line with our names on our bibs. I ran that Boston Marathon and came in 4th place. And it was an Well, it is so important. It is so important. We've talked so much about it today. Diversity is so important, right? It's so important. And we need to continue to evolve with diversity. We say all races and gender, and I believe it to my bones. And yet we also need to add and ability, right? People with disabilities are the largest minority in this country. I'm not saying one is more important than the other. They all are. But if we don't include and ability, we leave out such a giant number of people. I've been proud to be part of advocating for stopping Medicare from stopping coverage for prosthetic limbs. You heard that right, yeah? They tried to stop coverage. They said if you can walk in crutches or be in a wheelchair, isn't that good enough? What did we do? I partnered with the Amputee Coalition. They called me up. They said, we need a face to this. We aren't heard, we aren't talked about, we need a face for this. And I said, where am I showing up? They said, you're showing up in Maryland. We're going to end in DC. We got a permit for the Capitol protest. We got a permit to go to the Capitol and protest. See what I did there? And we went and we were in Maryland. We spoke to Medicare. We were each given 30 seconds because they didn't want to hear us. They thought we'd get flustered. They were ruffling papers so that we wouldn't get flustered. I called them terrorists to their face. Sure did. I can fit it in 30 seconds. Don't try me. And we hopped in buses. We had a sponsor. I found us a sponsor to get lunches to keep people fed. And we got everyone in wheelchairs and crutches and motorized wheelchairs. It is not an easy feat, but we are determined and we are in the masses. And we wore bright orange for April Limb Loss and Limb Difference Month. And we went there and we advocated and we advocated and we stood and we sat and we ate and we tried to keep people standing and sitting and doing their best. And finally, at about 7 or 8 o'clock at night, we got a tap on the shoulder to come upstairs and talk. And we managed to stop that from going through, but it is still a threat to this day. They don't talk about people with disabilities with voting. We aren't talked about. We aren't talked about when people are talking about mail-in ballots. You have to keep mail-in ballots because of people with disabilities. It's part of ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, which allows me to have my service dog fly with me. This is Fred Astaire. Fly with me everywhere. And it's what allows people to be able to vote in mail. I partnered with Joe Kennedy, the redhead Joe Kennedy. I was his dance teacher for the Kennedys for their wedding, and partnered with him to advocate for people with disabilities. The candidates don't even mention us. So when you're going out and you're picking your 5, which I believe in that charge, make sure that you're also talking about ways that you can help, which is going to your voting center early and checking to see if they're using the elevators as storage. instead of keeping that open. Making sure the ramps are there and clear of ice. Making sure that people are being offered to stay in line. Maybe bringing a chair or offering to drive someone there. People with disabilities don't vote. You want to know the percentage? This was 3 years ago. I am faulting myself for not looking that up last night. I meant to. It was close to 40%. Can you imagine if one candidate mentioned us, what the turnout could be? I think it's pretty beautiful to think of that. I vote. I know it matters. But I also know what it's like to not even be mentioned. It's hard. But I believe that when someone tells you something can't be done, it's more of a reflection of their limitations and not yours. That surgeon that came in that night that said I probably would never make it, he was fired that week. He never made it to 20 years. I'm glad, right? I do believe in keeping people realistic in their dreams. But if one surgeon says you can do it, you can't go back there and tell another person you can't. We already agreed in earlier talks today that were so profound that bullying is not okay in any workplace, right? To patients, to careers, people in careers the same as you. And I want to end on this note, and that is that your life can change in a matter of 3.5 seconds. I know mine has many, many times. In 2019, I was hit by a car in a crosswalk and spent another 4 months in the hospital with my Superman surgeon. It is hard to get knocked down over and over again. Your life can change in 3.5 seconds. Mine has many times, but it is up to you to make every single second count after, because believe me, they do. Thank you for the gift of your time today. It's been thank you for what you do. Thank you for the advocacy that you have. I'm so grateful. Thank you. Thank you so much.